Hi everyone, it's Laura Volpes for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create a floral thank you card using the Floral Wreath stamp set. This is the set that I'll be using today. It is a larger stamp set and I find it really gorgeous with that beautiful floral wreath and all the sentiments that you can use. I started by stamping the wreath on some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock, and I'm using Ink on 3 fade out ink, but any light colored ink will work. I wanted to do some heat embossing over an alcohol marker colored image, and because embossing powder can actually ruin the nibs of your markers, I am going to start off with this light ink at the beginning, and then I'm going to do some heat embossing afterwards. The important thing for this technique is that you do not remove the stamp from the lid of your MISTI, and you will need some sort of stamp positioning platform like the MISTI. Next, I started doing some coloring, and even if I am using no-line coloring ink, I'm not worrying too much about adding back all the detail from the stamped lines, because that will sort of be brought back in the card once we do the heat embossing. For now, I'm just adding some quick color using my Illustrator alcohol markers, and you can see the marker numbers that I used on screen, as well as in the blog post that I have linked in the description box down below. The color palette that I'm using is pretty basics. I colored all the flowers with these two light blue markers. These are IB3 and IB1. I'm going to add some pink to the centers of the flowers for a little bit of extra colors, and then I'm going to use some mint green for the leaves. I'm using two markers to color all the images. For the flowers, I added a few brush strokes to create some texture, and for the leaves, I'm starting by adding some shading to the center and then blending everything out with my lighter marker, and this is the image once it's all colored in. At this point, I can go ahead and add my heat embossing, so I have my MISTI here with the stamp that, as I said already, I didn't move after doing my stamping. I used an anti-static powder tool to make sure that the embossing powder wouldn't stick anywhere else but on the stamped lines, and I inked up my stamp with embossing ink, and then I'm closing the lid of my MISTI so that I can transfer the ink on my images. The embossing powder that I decided to use today is called Rose Glints. It's by Wow, and as the name says, it's kind of like rose gold color, but it's not metallic, it's like shiny. So it adds a very nice touch and a very unique detail to the card. I coated the image with the embossing powder, made sure to remove any excess by sort of tapping the back of the cardstock and also using a little paintbrush, and then I melted the powder with my heat gun. And here is the final result. I think it's really pretty and the color goes really well with the palette I have on the flowers. For the base of my card, I went for something super quick and easy. I die cut some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock with a cover die by Studio Katia. The die is called Rectangular Dots Cover, and I decided to add just a little bit of extra detail to this background using a sparkle pot by Spectrum Noir. This is in the color Champagne and it's going to match really nicely with the color of the embossing powder that I used on my image. I then went ahead and fussy cut the floral wreath using some precision scissors. This stamp set does not come with matching dies, so I'm using my scissors to cut everything out, and in order to get a more precise cut, as always, I am holding the scissors in my right hand, which is my dominant hand, and I'm holding them still. I'm just basically opening and closing the scissors so that I can cut the paper, but I'm moving the paper around the scissors with my left hand rather than the other way around. And this ensures a more precise cut. Anyway, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to be pretty anyway. The last step was to work on my sentiment, and I have a circle that I die cut with the dotted patterns set 1 dies by Studio Katia. I'm going to emboss the sentiment using the same Rose Glitz embossing powder by Wow, so I stamped it again with embossing ink, coated it with my embossing powder, and I'm using a scrap piece of cardstock to gather the excess powder so that I can funnel it back in the jar, and then again I'm using my heat gun on the higher heat setting to melt the embossing powder. For my card base, I have some heavyweight white cardstock that I cut to 4¼ by 11 inches and I scored at 5½ inches, and at this point what is left to do is to glue everything together. I'm using some Studio Katia liquid glue on the card base so that I can first adhere the background, and liquid glue makes it easier to line things up properly, or precisely I should say, because it gives you that extra wiggle room to move everything in place while the glue is still drying. Next is the wreath, which I adhered on the top portion of the card, more or less slightly shifted so it's not perfectly centered on the card front, and then I adhered the sentiment on top. You could also raise the wreath or the sentiment circle on some foam tape, but I decided to keep the card flat so that it would be easier to mail. And then of course I had to add a little bit of bling, using this time rose gold confetti, which matched perfectly with the shimmer on the background and the embossing powder too. Here is a close-up look at the final result. Just a few easy steps, but the result is really pretty. And that's it for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create with the Studio Katia Floral Wreath stamp set. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.